Hello, everyone. We start in just a second. How you guys doing on this great Thursday right before let me unmute?
I'm doing well. It's good to see everybody. I'm actually off today, so I got to spend the morning with my son, get a little work done around the garden, and as soon as this is over, I'm going to take off my shirt and tie and go for a bike ride. So it's a good day.
I hear that. I decided not to wear a shirt and tie today. I said I was going to dress down, do something a little different, for a change. I'm always dressing up. I think Alan is getting ready to come on in just a second.
And I'm doing well. I'm doing well. This is my second Zoom call this morning. So after this, I will kick back and watch some reruns.
It's great because it's a beautiful weekend coming. A long weekend for us all, and that's something that we all looking forward to. I know that's right for certain.
David, I have to say I wasn't going to wear a shirt and tie, but you always have one on, and so does Alan. And I was like, at the last minute, I ran upstairs and grabbed a shirt and tie.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I think, let me check and see if Alan is in the room. Let me get a second. I don't see him there yet. Just give us a couple seconds. I'm hoping he get on. I thought I saw his email come through. I think there he is now. He's coming in. Let me bring him on. He probably has a shirt and tie on too, though, knowing him. How you doing today, Miss Carter? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Yeah, this is my first and last Zoom of the day, so it's all fun after this. Although this will be fun. I don't see a tie, Alan. Uh-oh. What happened, Sam?
Alan, no one told me there was a dress code.
Alan, I was just telling David that you two guys always have suits and ties, and I almost never do. And at the last minute, I ran upstairs, threw on a suit and tie.
Well, you're making us look
great. This is a reverse of normal, and I'm totally cool with it.
You're making us look good, Sam.
Well,
no, but you guys usually are always so sharply dressed, and I'm usually the guy with like a polo shirt on. And but anyways, it's good to see everybody.
Yeah, sure is. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to be cautious of everybody's time. First of all, I want to briefly introduce what we're doing here. I want to say thank you, for allowing yourself to be a part of this panel. It's very exciting as we continually deal with a number of issues within a number of our communities. The panel discussion today, the panel is called The Balcony and the Dance Floor. The reason we call it that is a concept where a supervisor, a leader, or someone in leadership role, they're on the balcony a lot. And at times, the balcony, you have that overview of the big picture. But we also know it's important to be down with the people where you can really touch the people and see what's going on. And that's what we call a dance floor. And so this panel discussion, we intend on talking about reentry programs along with criminal background screenings. And I know we have a number of experts here on a call with us today to help with that. The Housing Authority just moved in a direction to eliminate criminal background screening, all but HUD mandated ones. But we also have 3 reentry programs. So this is an exciting discussion to talk about, and I'm welcoming all our panelists here today. So again, I'm David Northern, and I'm the Housing Authority of Champaign County CEO, and I'll be the moderator for this panel discussion. And I think we can jump right into it and allow our first panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are.
So is that me?
Yes, that's you, Ms. Peach.
Okay. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you. And thanks for asking me, David. You said your panel of experts. Well, we look at you as the expert, and we're just the ones that are kind of following you. But we will do the best we can. I know I will. I'm Minnie Pearson. I am the president of the NAACP Champaign County branch. And in my capacity, I work with all types of people in all types of needs and issues. And one of the things that we do get, input and feedback from is housing. So this is a good platform to kind of talk about this. But I'm glad to be here, and I'll wait to hear how everybody else is doing, and then we'll move from there. But that's who I am right now. And this is my second Zoom call this morning. And so after that, it's too early to have a glass of wine, but I might have a milkshake.
That's good. That's good. We can start off. Can we have our next panelist briefly introduce themselves and tell us, what organization you're with? I think that's Ms. Carter.
Yeah, sure. My name is Destiny Carter, and I'm with the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. I'm a policy specialist, and with my role in the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, I'm also our representative in the Rocky Coalition, which is the Restoring Rights and Opportunities Coalition of Illinois. In Rocky, we work primarily with individuals with lived experience, and we enable our grassroots leaders to work alongside us in developing policy that is beneficial to the reentry community. We've had numerous strides in creating policies that help people have access to park district employment, access to employment in public schools, access in the healthcare system, as well as changed some laws to a broaden ability for individuals to seek record seal in more expansive and numerous criminal backgrounds. And so really, I'm just here to talk about some of the changes that we hope to see in the state. Right now, we're working on our public housing access bill and hoping to get that passed next session. That really is following in line with the work of Champaign County, and also just establishing a lot more uniform across the state of Illinois and giving people with criminal records better access to public housing, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is really important to us, and allowing people to have affordable housing that is also long-term. That's me, and I'll pass it along.
Well, thank you for that. And it's exciting about that bill, and I know the other panelists here on the call are excited to see the bill come to fruition through the state. Alan and myself is part of a working group that we're working on that bill. So Alan, since I mentioned your name, why don't we go with you next in terms of your introduction and who you are?
Thanks, David. I'm Alan Zeiss. I'm the Executive Director of Winnebago and Boone County Housing Authorities. We're a regional agency in Northern Illinois. We had done a very small demonstration program with HUD in the public housing portion, and with the Illinois Association of the Illinois Housing Development Authority, and the Department of Corrections and New York University for the state-funded voucher program. And that sort of morphed into what the state is doing now with their demonstration program that you and I do, David. And I've since become a member of the Reentry Task Force serving on reentry housing.
Oh, thank you for that. You didn't mention your work with NARO, the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and your leadership there in the state and along in the nation also. Why don't you just briefly mention that and how that ties into what we're doing and talking about today?
Well, that's kind of you, David. I'm the Vice President for the Illinois chapter. I'm the Vice President for the region, NARO, and then I'm on the Board of Governors for National NARO. I'm the chair for the International Research and Global Exchange Committee. And one of the areas that we're looking at right now is diversity, inclusion, equity. And we look at what's happening with other countries and how this can translate into best practices for us.
Thank you for that. And again, NARO is the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. It's an organization that oversees and helps housing authorities with policy direction throughout our nation. It's based out of DC. So thank you for that, Alan. I happen to be a part of the state chapter also as the VP for Member Services. So thank you for that. Next, Sam, would you briefly introduce yourself? We work well with IDA. IDA, the Illinois Housing Development Authority, does a great deal of work with a number of organizations throughout our state. But one thing they really work with us with is providing low-income housing tax credit, both 4% and 9%. Our last panel discussion, we talked about the effects of COVID-19 on our developments. We currently have like 9 developments going on with IDA in terms of either leading it or partnering. So I'm excited to have Sam on board also today.
Thank you. So my name's Sam Wardka. I am with the Illinois Housing Development Authority. And unlike the public housing authorities that David and Alan direct, we actually do not own any housing. We don't manage any housing. We finance housing, both first-time homebuyer mortgages and multifamily rental housing. And we do run some small rental assistance programs. And specifically, we talked a little bit about the rental housing support program, which both David and Alan take part in, and specifically the Reentry pilot program under that program. I have come from a background of primarily policy work at IDA, specifically policy around serving harder to serve populations, homeless, persons with disabilities, reentry housing. I don't remember what my title is, but I'll tell you what, two executive directors ago, I was at a national conference having a drink with our executive director at the time, Mary Kinney, and she introduced me as Ida's conscience, and it was the nicest thing that's ever been said to me, quite honestly. And why that's important is because for me, when we talk about reentry housing, we're talking not just about doing the right thing by people who have paid their debt to society, but we're talking about a racial equity issue, because we know that people of color are disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, both in arrest and in sentencing and in everything else. And the fact that that affects their housing and employment and other choices down the road is part of the structural racism that we're dealing with today in a very real way, due to the unfortunate deaths of George Floyd and other people recently. So this is a very timely issue, and it's a very important issue. So I'm super flattered to be here. And I really appreciate inclusion in this call. Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of it. I know at times, you know, everybody's busy, but I know IDA sometimes, you know, may not participate in certain items, but we've been blessed and fortunate to have IDA participate in 2 panels this year. One earlier, Tim, he's no longer with IDA, but he participated in it, and then now you, Sam. So I totally appreciate that. Sam brought up an interesting point. He talked about, you know, the civil unrest. He talked about, you know, policy directions that started some of the problems that we face in today. So to start off, why don't we allow Minnie, who's the president of the NAACP in Champaign County, just to talk about some of the things that, you know, you guys are doing here in Champaign County and your thoughts around some of the reentry and the criminal background screening policy changes.
Okay, I think with the reentry, we have to first look at, they are coming out with, they're already traumatized. It is a very, very stressful situation. And oftentimes they're making the transition from, you know, getting out to reaching their hometown where their families are. Sometimes I bet they think about, maybe it would be best if I would go back, because at least I know what I'm facing, you know, back there. But then there's an excitement, you know, about being out. But it's stressful. And then especially when you get out and there are restrictions on where you can live, you don't have a job, you don't have a driver's license, you don't have a cell phone, you don't have these things, and your family, who's probably already stressed out themselves, they can't take you in. So that's additional stress. And you don't want to end up going back to where you came from at a certain point. So it's very stressful. And some, Sam, you mentioned how it's predominantly Black and brown people who are facing these criminal, they have criminal, you know, backgrounds. And so it's very restrictive. And I know historically back in the day, it was basically, I'm sure that there was systemic racism, but we didn't talk about the word systemic racism at that time. We was just protecting the people who were already in public housing and their children. And so what we did was they did criminal backgrounds to make sure that the housing would be, you know, pretty clear and wouldn't be in jeopardy. So the criminal background check helped, you know, to make sure that people weren't violent, weren't bringing crimes or drugs or near children when they shouldn't have been. So it was kind of okay with everybody at that particular time. But as we progress and come on with, reentry, it's all about how we can do a wraparound to help the people who are coming out and to help lessen their traumatic experiences. And it's terrible sometimes when they get out and they can't live with relatives. So oftentimes a girlfriend or relative would take them in and house it and put their own children's lives or their lives at jeopardy. So it's been hard, but this reentry that we are beginning to talk about and unravel and dismantle and do wraparound will go very far to help people.
Well, thank you for that conversation piece. I know when the housing authorities talked about making some decisions around changing our policy, with the support of our board members, our staff, a number of our landlords, community members, the NAACP was at the table with us. So I appreciate your leadership and the NAACP's leadership in that effort. We all have to work together to ensure that, everyone that we serve has an opportunity to survive and, to overcome some of those obstacles. With that said, we talked a little bit about policy. And so, Destiny, I want you to can you just briefly detail for us the bill that you discussed? I know Alan and myself are both on a working group with you, along with a number of other individuals, but just briefly discuss it and, see how, explain how it affects our conversation today.
Absolutely. So again, as part of my role, I work with the Rocky Coalition. And if I didn't say this before, the Rocky Coalition is made up of CCH, Cabrini Green Legal Aid, Community Renewal Society, and Heartland Alliance. And so we all work together to address issues of reentry. So our public housing access bill is a result of a survey that we created a couple of years ago to really identify from people with lived experience what their barriers are the most and what they need. And from there, we learned that they're looking for more opportunities in housing, more opportunities in education, and more opportunities in employment. And we created the Public Housing Access Bill, which is essentially a bill that establishes no wait period. So ordinarily, when someone is trying to apply for public housing, there's often a wait period for when they're able to apply after they've been released. And so we want to eliminate that simply due to the fact that for a lot of public housing, especially in major cities, which a lot of people that are low income often live, the wait list, for example, for the Chicago Housing Authority there's 10,000 people or 100,000 people, I think, on it. And it takes years and years and years. One of our grassroots leaders has been on the wait list for 3 years and has still not gotten an apartment. And so by doing this, we hope at least to speed up the process a little bit for people with records. In addition, we hope that there's only a 6-month look back period to the date of application so that the most current and relevant crimes are the ones that are being examined by public housing authorities, especially limiting them to those records and those crimes that are federally prohibited under HUD restrictions. In addition to that, we would require and hope to require public housing authorities to keep record of the number of individuals that are applying, and also to establish an independent reviewer to review criminal records so that there is that bias removal. But we really just think that this is important, not only because nationally, but also in the state of Illinois, approximately 1/4 of the population has a criminal record. And in order to address, 1/4 of the people that live in the state, we really think that public housing is necessary, and access to public housing, not only in the city, but also widespread, is really important. Another thing to note is the reason that we're looking to make this a law across the state of Illinois is because public housing authorities in this state and in a lot of states have different restrictions. And the problem with that is if I live in Chicago, my access to public housing, apart from the that wait list, is a lot easier with my record. But if I move to another area of the state, I may be prohibited for simply having a misdemeanor. So we really want to change that and allow people not only the flexibility to access public housing, but to be able to move in the ways that may be best for them financially and just in general. And also I want to mention one last thing. I want to mention that both the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless and Rocky believe that housing is a human right. And we really believe that in that we should allow people access to housing, not only in general, but through our programming with reentry programming, that we allow them access to wraparound services, but don't force them to compete amongst each other to earn the right to a safe place to live. So we're just hoping that with these widespread changes, access to housing is less difficult, so that these wraparound services that we have are focusing more on things that people need and not just getting them their basic necessities.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm excited about that bill, and I'm just happy that the Housing Authority of Champaign County worked with its community members, and we listened to them, and we made it, come to fruition a little earlier. And not only we're not requiring any look back, and so we just feel that when people come out of being incarcerated, they serve their time, and so they have a right to move back into the community, move back into the loved one's home, reunite with families, and move on with their life, right, without being interfered with. So,
That's great.
you know,
That's great.
we didn't
Can I
want to
just make a quick comment?
Oh, no problem. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Destiny. This is awesome, because some of the complaints that we've had in the past is with people who say, they should look at us on a case-by-case basis, because some of our background checks, is not as severe as someone else's. So it's there, this is good to hear. So I am all for this program.
That's great. So that's what, we used to do a case-by-case basis along with a wait period. So our policy was that it was a lot stricter a few years ago, but we changed it in August 2019. And so we changed it from 5 years to 3 years. And then we looked at the individual, and it's still like, so you have one individual deciding the fate of another individual still. What if I'm having a bad day when I'm reviewing it? What if the crime that you committed is the same type of crime that was against one of my family members that I cared about? And so we didn't want to have any bias a part of that. As a professional, I wouldn't look at that. However, but the human error, we would want to take that out and just give people a fair shot. And so I know the bill, has that in there. So I encourage us to talk about that and look at that more and seeing what we can do to eliminate that feature in the bill. But thank you for that. And thank you for adding that in, Minnie, for us also. Sam, I want to ask you next, just to talk a little bit about some of the wraparound services and what made IDA go to this direction. As one of the leaders in the state, as you mentioned before, that don't really own units, but really work with community partners and developers and people like that in order to provide that affordable housing that we need throughout our state.
So there's a lot of factors that made IDA go in this direction. One of them, I'll just pat myself on the back. I've been trying to do something in reentry pretty much since I got to IDA 10 years ago. But really what really finally got it done was the political window to do it. A bill was passed in 2018, I believe, that mostly related to IDOC reforms. And there was a small part, and our legislative liaison at the time, who's no longer with us, and it was not Shar. Shar would have caught this. But our legislative liaison at the time missed that we were named in the bill. And what the bill said was, IDA, you need to create a housing program for frequent utilizers of systems who are coming out of IDOC. So people who have experienced homelessness, hospitalizations, etc. So that's what really drove us finally getting our act together to do this. What motivated me was, as I said, the social justice aspect of it. And also, while NARO is a great organization, and I've been to NARO conferences, the housing finance agencies also have an umbrella organization called NCSHA, National Coalition of State Housing Agencies. And about 6-7 years ago, I went to a conference at one, and I was really looking forward to a program that I had designed winning an award because I thought it was the coolest thing. But Alaska won the Supportive Housing Award that year. And you know what they won it for? They did a reentry program. And Alaska's HFA also has vouchers. Unlike IDA, they have housing choice vouchers for the balance of their state because only Anchorage and Fairbanks have housing authorities. What they did is they took a group of people, coming out of the prison system, and they gave them vouchers. And their control group was everybody else that they didn't have enough vouchers for. The recidivism rate after 3 years for the people who had vouchers was 11%.
Wow.
The control group was in line with national average at around 55%. Now, when we talk about recidivism, what are we talking about? We're not just talking about people going back to jail and the expense of that and the trauma to that person. We're also talking about the fact that another crime was committed and there was probably a victim. Not always. Sometimes it's a victimless crime like a parole violation where they just, didn't check in with their parole officer. And it drives me nuts that people go back to prison for stuff like that. That's just bonkers in my mind. But in the cases where there was another victim, that's another cost to society. So in my mind, if you can reduce recidivism from above 50% to 10, 11% by simply giving people a housing voucher, how do we not do this as a country?
Exactly, Sam. I want to add to that. It takes leaders like the ones here today on this panel to make policy changes and work with our elected officials, our number of board members and community members to make that possible. But when you talk about, the average cost of a voucher to a household, depending on the size of that household, right? And you talk about the cost of keeping somebody incarcerated. You can probably provide 2 vouchers to families to have stable housing versus putting people in prison, right? And we talked about the pipeline of prison and how that is a business now. Just like it's a business for us to lease up our units, the incarceration rate needs to stay high. So those stockholders can have individuals there. So what we're trying to do is eliminate that. We're trying to eliminate that and build a better society overall in our various communities. So I applaud that effort, and losing that award maybe made you work a little harder toward it. So thank you for that.
That's right. I want to point out something else, is that there was a memo from the Assistant General Counsel of HUD under Obama that basically laid it out. And that memo says that criminal background checks may be a violation of fair housing under the disparate impact theory of law, because we know for a fact through facts and statistics that people of color who are a protected class and persons with disabilities are incarcerated at a higher rate than other people. So you're having an adverse effect against protected classes by doing criminal background checks. And I think that says it all. It's time to ban the box.
Exactly. And to not cut in, because I know we have a little time, but getting feedback from the community, it says, please suggest to David, what about ban the box in HUD programs in Illinois and elsewhere, as there are appeal processes for HUD to make decisions. So you all are on the right track. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. You and Minnie, I neglected to mention that we both are part of Greek organizations. I'm a Q and Minnie's a Delta, so we're brother sister, and we work hard together in the community. So it's always great, to see good friends and continuing to do good things. So with that being said, Alan, I want to ask you a couple questions. Can you talk a little bit about the housing authorities historically, how they looked at criminal backgrounds, and also talk about some of the consequences that you saw or see, of that restrictive policy?
Yeah, excuse me. Historically, we could see this go back to the 1980s and the 1990s with the one strike policy, where housing authorities were mandated by the federal government on how they should look at persons who are incarcerated. But then you can take it even farther, because you can look at how people were incarcerated unequally. Just in drug cases alone, you can see how sentencing was different from crack with powder cocaine, for example. And it's not taking into all the mitigating circumstances that could exist. When we look at drug abuse, for example, there are people with mental health difficulties who self-medicate, and then to pay for it may resort to, we've seen people have to go to prostitution or burglars or such, but then they get help later. And it goes to what we're discussing here. I made some notes about this with some of the great things I've been hearing others say, and Destiny's right about housing needing to be a right. How do you get a job unless you have an address? How do you go to school unless you have an address? How do you open a bank account unless you have an address? How can you be back into a member of society? It's not possible. And that affects recidivism. In the very small demonstration program that we first started with, we also saw only 10% recidivism, like Sam was talking about. But how can we measure all this? And that goes back to what Destiny was talking about with the House Bill 206 and the measuring process. Because otherwise, how can we show the success of these programs on a national level so that they can be replicated by other housing authorities? You have the moving to work designation, which is great. And I think you do internal reporting all the time that Congress uses then to replicate best practices to the nation, which is great, which is how the program's designed to work. And then this House bill would also allow that to happen. And then I finally had to make mention, when we're looking at historically about drugs and such, criminal background, is housing authorities should only be looking to see if a person can comply with the lease. Yeah. That's the only thing we're concerned about. And so throwing up another barrier, we can say that there's an informal hearing process a person can go through, but that's another barrier. And it goes to what you were talking about, David, to where now someone is making another decision on someone's life after they've paid their debt.
Yeah. See, and that's important. And we want to make sure that individuals like ourselves, organizations like ours, lead from the front, make these changes, pass these bills, bring in reentry. We were fortunate enough to be awarded one of IDA's reentry grants, and we're getting ready to start our program here in Champaign County. So that's great. Even with a passing of the policy that we did in Champaign County, we had interest from the House Financial Committee who want to discuss and have a discussion around making it a larger policy for housing authorities. I just was notified. I'm also the senior vice president of the Public Housing Authority Directors Association in Washington, who also works with housing authorities and help us guide policy in Washington. And when we made that change in our policy in Champaign County, utilizing the flexibilities that we have, FADA's policy staff sent it, to the House Committee staff, and they loved it. They want to talk about that. And so they want to further that effort and that momentum while we have it right now. So I just, it's just so important, this ideal, if we want to change lives, having a move to work organization, having a youth bill, having reentry. We want to give people a right opportunity just to overcome obstacles. And that's going to make our whole society even better and eliminate this mass incarceration thing that we all face in our various communities. And like you said, Sam, before, minorities, when we were hit hard with whether it's drugs, crack cocaine, you look at the difference between opioids and crack cocaine in terms of how people look at it. They demonize crack cocaine, but opioids are, it's just a passive type, drug that's really not criminalized. And that's just totally unfair. So there's so many individuals that was incarcerated for marijuana, and now in our state we have where it's legalized marijuana usage. So there's so many policies that's on the books that we need to change, and I'm glad that we're in the forefront doing that. Destiny, you talked about the organizations that you're with. What's some of the other things that you're working on that aligns with reentry or the criminal backgrounds that you may speak a little bit about the people that we serve overall?
Yeah, so another thing that we're also working on is our employment bill. And with that bill, it's often similar to the public housing access bill in trying to expand and reduce expand a statewide restriction on employers looking into an individual's criminal background, but also to more closely align their inquiry to the types of things that would make them not able to comply with that job, for instance. So, for example, if an individual is applying to clean up in a park, their arrest for simple assault or robbery would have very small it would have not as much of a bearing on their ability to do that job. Now, and it's also within reason. If someone has robbed 17 banks, maybe we don't let them be a teller right away. But I think that having those is really helpful. Something that we're working on within CCH, and with some other folks, is that we want to expand knowledge about the stimulus checks. And so even something as simple as the release of the stimulus checks for people that are experiencing reentry, and people experiencing homelessness, their access to getting government assistance in this form has been extremely limited. And so what we've done is we've worked with a group to really spread information to folks reentering that they're eligible. A lot of people don't believe that they're eligible because they were incarcerated or they don't make enough to file taxes. And so we're really trying to reach out to those communities. But again, there are barriers for, much like we said with finding employment, how do you get your check if you don't have an address? If you don't have a direct deposit, how do you get that check into your account? And so we've just seen that not only criminal records, but experience of poverty and homelessness have really had an impact on people's ability to just grow as human beings. And so those are kind of the main things that we've been working on. And we've also been closely connected with organizations that are working to address not only the criminal background check, but also the access to apartments in the Chicago area, including the Chicago Housing Authority. So that's basically what we're working on so far.
That's great stuff.
One quick comment. Because I have to get the questions in from the community.
Yes.
It says HUD eliminating stigma will help signal other landlords that the person have paid their dues and they should be given a fair chance to earn a living. So I just want to slip that in right there.
Well, one of the things that we did in terms of our policy, we had some interns working on it, and they did a lot of research, and the data showed that individuals that's at incarceration is less likely to commit a crime than anybody that hadn't been incarcerated already once they did their time a few years out. And so if we give them a stable place to live, if we give them a job opportunity, and not giving it to them, it's giving them an opportunity to receive that with the skills that they may have. We'll help them overcome those obstacles, and then we won't have to worry about individuals being incarcerated and then trying to figure out what's going to happen to their kids while they're away, what's going to happen to the mom that they were taking care of in that home with an individual with a disability. So I mean, it's just amazing how many lives we can change with really just changing the policies. We also have a youth build program at our housing authority. So like Alice said, utilizing our flexibility, we can have a number of programs. And youth build, a number of our young people have criminal backgrounds, and so in discussing it with them, they're excited about it. One of the things the young lady there said is that every time I apply for housing, every time I apply for a job, this felony come up that I had when I was 18 that I probably shouldn't have had if I had a mentor or a little financing to really help me. I pleaded to something that I really didn't have nothing to do with, right? And so those are the type of things that we want to correct and really fix. Minnie, you talked about some of the community comments and individuals, making comments around some of the changes that we're making and how that we need to encourage landlords. And, that's something that we're also, that's why we're making it public about the decisions that we're making. While we're making them, we encourage a number of landlords to be a part of our reentry program. As I mentioned, we have a couple. One is funded by IDA, and another, we have two that's with local not-for-profits here. And so what can you say about, not just reentry, but the criminal backgrounds, the individuals that's coming to you? How is the NAACP working on anything to help eliminate those backgrounds, like the young lady I mentioned, the 18-year-old that pleaded to a felony that probably shouldn't have?
Yes, this pandemic, COVID, is really putting a hardship on that, because normally what they come to us through our legal redress program. And of course, we have to be very careful not to, to play like we're attorneys or lawyers. So we have people who we send them to after we hear their cases. And their cases are of fear, trauma around how they're going to be looked at. And there is a strain between them and their families. So it says housing authorities and reentry programs would work together to really good together to provide so many affordable houses for a number of people released if the resources were there. It's needed to get started. Like, you know, we just mentioned not so long ago, jobs, cell phone, even transportation to a job, a mentor, a program where someone has already been incarcerated, but they came out. And so they are there as a support group to help navigate this person through all of the things that they need to do in order to make it. It says housing authority will be increased if people have stable employment, first of all. And another thing they were talking about is I get paid on certain parts of the month. Well, I might not be able to pay my rent until 2 days after the due date. So they didn't want to get a late notice or something, some repercussion behind that. So someone there to understand that I don't get paid until this time, and be able to articulate that to other people who were there renting from. So it's things like that, and also that. A lot of the things that is happening, they see it as somewhat discriminatory. They say it might not be intentional, but it's so embedded in the system that it comes across to them as discriminatory practices to eliminate them from getting into housing, or once they get in there, they've found fault at a lot of the things that they're doing. So, and it, to try to make them leave. So it's complaints like that we're getting.
And so one of the biggest things that we want to do here is ensure that individuals understand the policies and what's going on around this issue and the partners that we have at the table. I mean, you mentioned something about paying bills. Even this has nothing to do with reentry. This has nothing to do with criminal backgrounds. But having conversations with my staff at the Housing Authority, we decided to change our payment system to weekly versus biweekly. And that's just because individuals can budget more if they receive paychecks on a weekly basis versus twice, and at times change in terms of when rent's due. So just little things and policy changes, it don't hurt us. It's just hitting another button and dividing it by 4 versus dividing it by 2, just to help the staff members in a better way. And so that's what we need to do, not just our staff members, but individuals in the community. Just think about what we can do to make changes to policy. That's really not costing us anything more, because all the checks are direct deposit. We're not printing them and sending them out. So it's no cost to us. So, thanks for that. I want to talk about a little about, besides reducing the restrictions, when we talk about reentry, Sam, what's some proactive steps that we can take, as a community, as, supports of reentry programs to really help these individuals, that's trying to overcome these obstacles to be successful?
One of the things that we've heard from the Department on Corrections is that a very large percentage of folks coming out do have mental illness. And I'm going to go ahead and take it further. I'm going to agree with many. I think anybody who comes out of the Department on Corrections is going to have trauma. And while that may not rise to a diagnosable mental illness, coordinating with social services so that people have the wraparound services that they need. I mean, listen, we all need somebody to talk to. Just about everybody goes through trauma in their life, even if it's as simple as losing a loved one. And that probably is a lot more simple than the trauma of having been incarcerated. You got to have somebody to talk through your issues with. You have to have somebody to ask the questions of, how do I do this? So some of these folks have been locked up for 30 years. And if they got locked up at age 18 and 30 years have gone by, they're my age, they're 48, but they have missed the internet revolution. They've missed smartphones. They don't even know how to do this stuff. Do they know how to set up online payments? Do they know how, we need people to give them the life skills, to live in a society that, quite frankly, what was 30 years ago was 1990. Think about the world in 1990 and how much it's changed. How do we bring them into that world without giving them the life skills they need? You know, because they're not being taught that in prison. I can tell you that. I mean, maybe some of it, but not enough of it. They don't know how to sign up for courses online. In 1990, when I entered the University of Arizona, we used to use the phone to dial in and register for our classes. And I'm not talking about a smartphone. I'm talking about a you know, and actually that wasn't until my second semester. My first semester, we had to walk around with pieces of paper and get professors to sign us in at different long tables. So I think that is part of it, is you have to make people whole. Yes, we got to get them in housing. And I think housing gets them about 80% of the way there in most cases. When there's underlying mental health issues that are on top of the trauma issues, I think you need a lot more.
I definitely, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, yeah.
I'm done.
Okay.
I've heard my voice enough. I want to hear what other people have to say.
No, that's great. You talk about thinking about what it's like what would it was like in 1990. I wasn't even born yet, so I can't even imagine. But I would also say that when we talk about trauma, we also need to recognize that a lot of the people that are, when we talk about reentry being primarily a product of poor Black and Brown communities, that people are traumatized before they even go to jail and before they even go into prison. And so when we talk about affordable housing, it's not only affordable housing for those that are reentering, but also affordable housing in the communities that a lot of people are coming from. That sense of stability, and I know from personal experience, is critical not only to people's mental health, but just your ability to progress and grow as a person. And if you're coming from a community in which your parents or your community members do not have access to quality education, do not have access to employment, do not have access to housing and affordable housing, that it only sets you up for quote unquote failure, but it sets you up for circumstances in which you're going to have to fight to survive. And one of our grassroots leaders said something that was truly heartbreaking, but also a reality, is why do I have to wait to go to prison or to go to jail to get the services that I need to help me be a stronger person? Mm-hmm. And so when we look at that, we really need to re-examine how we treat our low-income communities and our communities of color, so that that's also a way to reduce recidivism, but that's also a way to strengthen, you know, how half of our population in the country and most of our population in the world. And so I just really think that when we look at reentry, the reason that reentry is important to me is that the world and the community, our communities have failed people that are returning. In a lot of ways. And so by reinforcing our reentry services and giving people fair opportunity, that next generation is only going to have more opportunity to grow from there. And so that's why I like to do this work. And I just think it's really important to kind of see the whole system and address the issues in all aspects.
And I like that we have young people like you who are continuing to do this work. The fact that you weren't even born in 1990. I love it. We need the strong young people to be leading this, quite frankly, because I'm Gen X. We tried, we failed. The baby boomers tried. They made more progress than Gen X did, quite frankly, but they also did not solve the problem. So really, this is where we're at, and you're where we're at.
Exactly. Great. That was one of the questions that I got from the community as well. It says, without stable housing, we're putting people at a greater risk of recidivism. They have paid their dues, and we need support. We need to support them when they re-entry into the community. One of the things I take it a little further is they thought that it would be really wise if there was somebody like a social worker or somebody in with the housing authority to encourage them to at least get into like Parkland College or go back to school to prove, that, you know, they're serious about giving this second chance reentering. So that was it.
Well, Britt, I'm sorry. Definitely you mentioned that you were born in the '90s, and then you also mentioned trauma. But you know, I can be honest with you. Lower income individuals have trauma before they born sometimes because their parents going through trauma, and so they're having trauma inside the womb also. So you know, it's just so important that we provide those services and we provide people opportunity to grow. I have family members that's been incarcerated, and you know, sometimes it's better to go back for them than to be out here in the real world because at least they know they have a place to sleep and they have meals.
Yeah.
You know, and they're so used to it. After, like you said, Sam, after 30 years of being locked up, it's hard coming back. After 3 or 4 months being locked up because of COVID, it's hard to get back into society. I need somebody to talk to, really. And so, you know, it's just really tough when we talk about that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that's also something that we see in our youth. So back when I was in college, although when I say back in college, it's not as far back as some, but I worked in a juvenile delinquency center. And so that was something that we heard a lot. Not only do adults feel like they're better off, that children in these juvenile delinquency centers were saying, I'd rather be here because here I have food, here I have people to hang out with, and here I have a warm bed to sleep in. And that's heartbreaking. And so I really hope that the work that you all are doing with the youth group or youth programming that's also critical.
Yes.
And I'm very excited to hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's this is so exciting. I think we can talk for an hour. We got about 10 minutes left. You know, before we have a brief opportunity for individuals to say their final words, I'm going to ask Alan a question I want to try to get an answer from. But also, I just want to remind everybody that, you know, we are filming live on Facebook, so it'll be recorded. Please share it with your friends and family members, your coworkers, and people like that. Also, we'll be posting your contact information. So if any of the viewers out there want to reach out to you, ask any questions, your information of your websites of your organizations also. You know, Alan, we had a lot of conversation and we've talked over the years about a number of programs that we have to work on it to provide the resources that our clients need. Now, I know we can make this policy change, but what can we do in your feelings to affect and change how the private market landlords will look at our changes?
You know, everything we talk about here just overturns something else that leads to something else. It's so many ripples, you know. In talking about change, I think right away of you and me and other housing authorities where the change has to be with our boards being progressive and creative to allow us to do this. You know, you've experienced that, I've experienced that, and that's part of our work is to send the message out to housing authority boards so if they want to do this and make it simple. The same thing for private owners in working with Sam's organization and with NYU and such and rolling out the graduate reentry. And, you know, we had the discussion just the other day about how we bring property owners into the program. And I think this starts to touch on how we create partnerships and how we involve the community, because the way we've been successful at it is because of our relationship with landlords and property owners. Yeah. It goes back far before this moment. You know, they're working with us. It's not a bureaucracy. They know each other by name. We know who the good landlords are. They know that we're a quality agency, and that's what makes a difference too. I just have to mention one other thing here, David. You were talking about the young lady from Youth Build and how she had to pretty much plead to a harsher crime because she couldn't afford legal representation. And I think that goes to the fact that how many people have criminal records they would not have except that they're poor. They can't afford the same attorney that someone who's affluent can. They end up with a harsher sentence and a harsher conviction. And how many people are pulled over in their car and found out they missed a court date for a collection agency, and now they have a record because they had a medical bill. And that's something that a housing authority or private landlord would look at. In many ways, sadly, we're not too far removed from the poorhouses that people were locked up in 18th century England.
Yeah, that's right. So as we move toward ending again, I would like to give all the panels let's the opportunity to say their final words, maybe a minute, just to say, your last statement around things. Sam, I want to start with you, but also I want to mention that, we talked about on a call how that we can make this change, and we know public housing authorities can, but IDA, in terms of the tax credit rules and regulations, the tenant selection process, along with some of the investors that invest in some of our low-income housing tax credits. We have to work with them to also make that policy change and that mindset change, because even if housing authorities change, those affordable housing developments, they have to change also.
That's exactly right. And, that's part of the thing, is that IDA actually allows the private owners to do a lot with their tenant selection plan. We give guidance that, you have to consider extenuating circumstances if you're going to do a criminal background check. The issue is if we were today to change our qualified allocation plan and say, if you want our credits, you may not do criminal background checks except for the HUD stated minimums, which are, lifetime sex offender list and cooking meth on federal property. The issue is that it would drive down equity prices, because the investors would get scared, because the end buyers of those tax credits are banks.
Yeah.
They're insurance companies in some cases, and their investment committees, which, let's be frank, are largely white male individuals, are going to say, wait a minute, this sounds like risk to me. And when I see risk, I want a higher rate of return. I want more money. So it's a fundamental issue. I don't know how to solve it. I think that the conversations are a start. Back when we started the statewide referral network, which sets aside units for extremely low-income persons with disabilities and homeless, that affected net cent raise rates. And we had to sit down with the investors and explain to them why it wasn't any more risky. And now we're not seeing the same impact. So it's conversations, it's getting to the right people, but it's going to take time. And
what's our final words?
Real quick, we always want to hear from the young people, because they got some fantastic ideas. I just love you. I want to talk to you sometime. It says something about connections to the Housing Authority Reentry Program CEO, Fresh Start, and the Criminal Justice Program to set aside a number of houses or apartments for the number of people that are re-entering into society. So I don't know whether this is something that, they got this idea from. And they said that they felt like the Housing Authority should receive much more support from the City Council, the mayor, and reentry program members and community leaders to make sure that they have what they need to provide these houses for other people.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Alan, final words.
I just have to mention again, when you were talking about the struggles that we had historically, and I think we just have to recognize that housing authorities have had to try just as hard for this, because it's very easy, unfortunately, for communities to point to a housing authority and say, well, these are the people in poverty, these are the people in crime, when actually this is the area that was abandoned finally because there was disinvestment into it. And then now minorities are finally allowed to move into that area. And it goes back to what we're talking about, where this is just ripples in a pond every time we touch something here. I really appreciate you bringing together this conference today and the panelists that we're speaking with, David.
Well, I appreciate you being a part of it. Ms. Carter, and I'll call her Miss Carter. She's the youngest person here. But I want to show you the respect that you deserve for the work that you're doing and the person you are.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here and speak with you all and to see some of the things that I been really passionate about since the beginning of my education come to fruition. Yeah, as a young progressive millennial, all I want to say is that get out and vote. I want people to participate in the political process, because for too long, people haven't been engaged in the political process, and it's helped us get to the unfortunate place that we're here today. And I really just think that more engagement in the political process, as well as electing more folks that have experience, is the only way that we're really going to be able to dismantle some of these systems that have been set up to, unfortunately, keep certain people in poverty. And I also say that to say that in interacting and understanding these policies, it's very important to engage with people with lived experience. You don't, it's very difficult, and I understand that, but learning about reentry, learning what it's like to be a person with a criminal record, learning what it's like to be a person with a mental illness from television and the news, you're getting the most over-dramatized, not actual example of what it means to be a person with a criminal record. And so I would just encourage everyone to actively participate and allow for the engagement of people with lived experience, because the only way we're going to help the community is by engaging it. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Sam, anything?
I want to thank everybody. I mean, really, I've learned a lot from both David and Alan over the years. It's a pleasure to meet Minnie and Destiny. I hope to learn from you guys over the years. This is the right work. It's morally the right work. It's an equity issue. But when we do have to go talk to our friends on the other side of the aisle, we also have to understand that it's financially the right work. And David hit on that. A housing voucher outside of the Chicagoland area is maybe 10, 12 grand a year. Prison and jail is so much more than that.
Exactly.
And you know what? Housing is a human right.
Yes.
And it's the foundation to get everything else done, like everybody else has said. Alan alluded to it. This is where we need to be, is housing is a human right. It's financially a good choice to get and keep people housed, and it's a public safety issue because recidivism drops substantially. So hit them with their talking points.
Exactly.
It's cheaper and it reduces crime.
Yes.
That's where we need to be.
Well,
Thank you
you
so
mentioned
much.
about lived experiences. As a young man that worked for our youth build program that spent 20 years incarcerated. And he's one of, he's a great employee, a great person. And, I love talking with him. He's very inspiring. And, the young people love him. But that's what we need to do. We want to give opportunities to people because he did his time. So he's no longer a threat. So, he may not even really committed that crime. He may have been around somebody else that committed a crime. But again, I just want to say thank you to all you guys for taking your time out right before the holiday to be a part of this call. Again, the balcony and the dance floor is something that we do every 2 weeks about a topic. We haven't decided on the next topic yet, but we will be talking again. This information, the live viewing of everything will be on our Facebook, where you can share it on all your medias and share it with your colleagues and stuff. So I just want to make sure that everybody have a great and safe weekend and holiday. And thanks again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Happy
Bye
Fourth,
now.
everyone.